Recently, I found myself in a depressive slump which hasn't allowed me motivation to work on projects I was previously passionate for. This happens from time to time, and there often isn't an easy solution for it, but what I tend to do to try and fix it is I fall back on old interests I used to have. This time I found myself falling back on Five Nights at Freddy's, a horror series which, if you don't know about, I would ask you if you didn't have internet in the mid-2010s. FNAF first released in mid-2014 and hit its peak popularity in early 2015, and kind of ruled the internet for a while. I became a fan of it during the time of its highest popularity and grew really attached to the horror franchise despite me not being a fan of horror at all. So falling back on this old interest, I did a stream where I ranked almost all the characters that have appeared in the FNAF series in a very subjective tier list. Dee Dee! The most perfect creature to ever be created. After the stream, I remember that FNAF became mainstream and then became hated by the mainstream in quick succession, and I thought it would be interesting to prove that the hate was meaningless and the games and series were still fun. I was going to title the video, "Is FNAF Still Good?" and try to make it a series where I looked at media that received mainstream hate and why it had received it, but then I hit a roadblock. During that same tier list stream, I found myself consciously preventing my own excitement and rambling on the series from coming through. I often toned down my reactions and thoughts on characters, and greatly undersold my love for the franchise as a whole. And you might think this is normal. Streaming is a social situation, and we often change how we act to fit into social situations. However, that stream had a max of 2 concurrent viewers and a dead chat. I wasn't streaming for anyone but myself, but I was still apprehensive about sharing my love of something. The next thing you might be thinking is that perhaps I was embarrassed enjoying something made by Scott Cawthon due to his recent actions. I'm not going to explain it all right now because it's too big of a tangent, and honestly, I don't think Cawthon deserves my effort, but suffice it to say he's proven himself to be reprehensible. However, when I was into the series, it was when Cawthon as a person was pretty far removed from the franchise, and he was really only thought about in his creative role. I always thought about him, and still think about him, in a death of the author kind of way, where the content he produced is detached from the person that produced it. So if it wasn't either of these factors, why did I still consciously censor my own joy? I found this to be a question much more interesting to answer than are the games still good, and to answer it, we need to talk about FNAF, neurodivergency, and the death of cringe culture. Five Nights at Freddy's is a series with lots of complicated, conflicting lore, which takes an incredible amount of focus, passion, and fixation in order to unravel. Anyone who's tried to make their own FNAF lore theories, or tried to understand someone else's, knows this to be true. So, reasonably, this would attract people who enjoy consuming media by picking it apart as much as they can, and putting the pieces back together with every fact and detail accounted for. It attracts Dipper Pines. Dipper Pines, for those who don't know, is one of the 2 protagonists of Gravity Falls, a fictional show centering around cryptozoology and the occult released on the Disney Channel in 2012. Dipper is notable for being the kind of person that is so deeply interested in the mysterious happenings of the town of Gravity Falls that he often risks his life or damages his health to uncover its secrets. He's detail-oriented, very analytical, and hyper-focused, and would love FNAF. And more importantly, Dipper Pines is autistic. Dipper's fixations are a great example of what is called a hyperfixation, or special interest, which is a particular interest held by an autistic person where they are deeply invested in and attach their personal identity to that said interest. My point in bringing him up is to make sure the nature of these interests are understood and relatable, because it's often difficult to describe the experience of having a hyperfixation to someone who has never had one. It's like trying to describe color to a person who is completely colorblind. However, for the sake of my argument, I will try my best. Hyperfixations come with a very intense set of emotions that are deeply affecting and personal, and can consume the lives of those that have them. If you're hyperfixated on the game Dungeons, Dungeons, and More Dungeons, every thought you have will always lead back to DDMD, even thoughts with nothing in them at all. And while it is a huge oversimplification, hyperfixations affect emotions like a bout of depression, where it makes sadness or loneliness somehow even worse, but applying to every emotion you feel. Highs get higher, lows get lower, and it's all dictated by the hyperfixation. The reason this is important to FNAF being hated is due to what I saw as 2 different groups existing during its heyday. The fans of the series, who, like Dipper, were largely hyperfixating, and those that hated the fanbase, who were largely ableist in their hate. Ableism is a form of bigotry just like racism or homophobia, but its main target is disabled people. Often it manifests as putting down physically disabled people or considering them as lesser to abled people. However, the way it manifests towards people with quote-unquote invisible disabilities is often what I'm going to call invisible ableism. Disabilities which do not have a visual tell, such as missing or damaged parts of the body or a mobility aid, are called invisible disabilities, which can be physical, mental, or developmental. For this topic, the latter two non-physical disabilities are what I'm going to be focusing on. These two groups often use the word neurodivergent as a blanket identifier. Neurodivergency is a huge umbrella term used to refer to people with what science defines as a mental or developmental disability, and it's very literal in its meaning. If the biological setup and composition of your brain differs from the majority, you are neurodivergent, literally brain different. This means it includes people with mental illnesses, trauma, and especially those with mental or developmental disabilities like ADHD, Down syndrome, and autism. Similarly to how these neurodivergencies don't have an obvious visual indicator, attacks against them can often be just as invisible. A great example of this invisible ableism is the D word. Now you probably have no idea what I mean when I say the D word, so for the sake of educating you, I will say the word in its entirety once, but from then onward I will be referring to it as the D word. The word is dumb. Now most people will look at this and be confused as to why I'm effectively censoring a word that just means stupid. That is because it doesn't just mean stupid. The D word has, in my experience, a largely unknown history of being an offensive word that referred to nonverbal people. It was associated with a lack of intelligence due to the ableist notion that a person who is unable to conventionally communicate is also unable to have complex thought, despite that notion being super wrong. A person not being able to communicate in the way you deem to be the correct method in no way betrays their inner thoughts nor the complexity of them. An obvious failure of this ableist notion is the case of literally one of the smartest men to ever live, Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking is without exaggeration one of the most important contributors to modern theoretical physics, and he could not talk. Throughout his life, his speech slowly deteriorated until he could not speak in a way that was easily understood, and by the time he was 43, a tracheotomy removed his ability to speak entirely. And yet in the same exact year that he lost his speech for good, this voiceless man published a work about the no-boundary proposition, a subject that I'm not even going to pretend I can understand or communicate. And past that, his contributions to science didn't slow at all, and he even became one of the best science communicators I have ever had the pleasure of learning from through his book The Universe in a Nutshell. The point being, society created these preconceived notions about connecting a person's abilities to their value and intelligence, and there are things you do in your life which reinforce and perpetuate these notions without you even realizing it. The ableism really is invisible to you because our society often offers no opposing viewpoints to the values it gives you. It's the same reason we are all inherently racist, because our racist society imparts racist beliefs and values on us without letting us realize that they even are racist, and it takes work and education to fight against your own inherent bigotry. Okay, so ableism hurts the well-being and lives of disabled people, and it's super subtle. Cool. Right, FNAF had a neurodivergent fanbase that got bullied by an ableist society, right? Well, yes, but it's more than that. And to understand the deeper parts, we need to talk about cringe culture. Cringe culture was a super popular form of blatant ableism, which revolved around targeting neurodivergent people and their interests to make the ridicule of both into public entertainment. It was arguably kicked off by YouTube's resident terrible person. No, not that one. Also, not that one. He's not even bad, he just makes bad content. Yeah, that one. Leafy is here. While he's basically dead to the internet now, back when he was popular, Leafy is here epitomized cringe culture, making entire videos ranting about disabled people and how weird and socially unacceptable he thought they were. Leafy had a lot of different targets, and many were children, which ultimately fused the ridicule of neurodivergency and children on the internet together. These attacks on children and neurodivergent people took off and somewhat spawned what we look back on today as cringe culture. He's even the one that made most people start using the word cringe in its ableist form. It's notable to say that Leafy isn't the originator of cringe culture, but he was arguably a big part of popularizing it and giving it its name. Cringe culture was based around taking instances of neurodivergent behavior such as stimming, meltdowns and shutdowns, and most relevant for this video, hyperfixations, and bringing them under the most negative light possible. It forged communities around laughing at neurodivergent children and adults doing things which the communities deemed childish and weird, and it became so mainstream that the word cringe literally had to be reclaimed. The still negative but less bigoted meaning of the word today is largely due to those who were attacked with it reclaiming the word as an insult of their own. But other than just the word, cringe culture had a lasting impact on the media people consumed at the time. It was a social minefield just to like something, because even if it wasn't cringe today, it could be tomorrow, and if you ever revealed you liked anything, you could become a target of ridicule. Often, these attacks were under the guise of laughing at childishness, and while that itself is morally reprehensible, it's actually just a euphemism for more ableism. Saying what people called cringe in those days was childish is a tactic of bigotry known as infantilization, treating someone as younger than they actually are in order to devalue or demean them. It's used because for some reason our society finds it acceptable to attack children instead of adults, and framing neurodivergent people as all being childish makes attacks on them easier to get away with. Calling someone childish as an insult is often just a mask for you thinking they aren't acting right, and examples of this are usually just attempts to guilt people into falling into societal expectations. This is incredibly prevalent in cringe culture because arguably its main goal is to use this tactic in order to erase neurodivergent people from society by making their behaviors socially unacceptable. Now, this isn't a conspiracy theory about cringe culture being an organized attack, because it's not. What I mean when I say that cringe culture had a goal is that while individuals hold no motives in their bigotry, bigotry itself has a motive and purpose. Like a politician running under racist policies in order to unify their base by giving a common enemy for people to froth at the mouth over. The racist people beneath the politician have no motives in their bigotry, but the bigotry itself was created with the motive of placing them in a group and controlling them. Cringe culture kicked off its popularity in 2014 and reached its peak in 2016. If you remember the dates of FNAF's release and popularity, you might already know what's happening. FNAF was cringe. It was possibly the cringe media of the time. FNAF was at first deemed childish, which was easy to convince the general public of due to its popularity mainly being from YouTubers known for having young audiences. However, this is clearly untrue, as FNAF was not a magnet for young people, but more a magnet for neurodivergent people, as I explained before. Anyone who liked FNAF were then labeled as cringe and shunned from society. And finally, the passion and efforts of neurodivergent people were the things used to back up the claim that the fanbase was cringe. If you've ever seen someone make fun of fan art from a fandom, that was basically the main method used to attack the FNAF fandom at the time. Fan art often comes from only the most dedicated fans who adore a piece of media so much that they spend time and effort learning and refining a talent in homage to the thing that they love. Because of this, it's much more likely for these fan creations to come from neurodivergent people with their intense hyperfixation interests. And while not all fan artists are neurodivergent, and the behaviors of some fan artists and the art they produce is very morally suspect, the case of the FNAF fandom often did not reflect these asterisks. Also, in the case of FNAF, these fan creations were not just art. A lot of the time they were entire games or characters. This can be likened to the attacks on Sonic fans and their original characters. It's notable that other media was attacked as well, things like My Little Pony, basically any anime, and more recently Fortnite, all of which perpetuated caricatures that were meant to be seen as antisocial or childish in order to validate the attacks on them. All of these attacks center around the caricature's obsession with the media, which is a telltale sign of masking an attack on hyperfixations. Above all, the most important thing to know is not only do none of these caricatures exist, the people they're meant to apply to are mostly doing things which do no harm. The reason I spent all this time building up all of this information just to make this point is that FNAF wasn't a random target of cringe culture, it was a prime target. Cringe culture was a community and ideology that preyed on the joy and interests of neurodivergent people, and while individuals may not have had motives, the overall motive of the culture was that of attacking and restricting neurodivergency in society. I wanted to make a video that was a celebration of something I loved. a hyperfixation I reveled in for years as it brought me so much energy and passion and joy. But I couldn't bring myself to do that because not only do these attacks hurt our social participation in the moment, it leaves a lasting impact on individuals who get sent the message that they aren't welcome, that their happiness is wrong, that who they are isn't allowed. I couldn't make this video happy because there was an entire popular culture devoted to the concept that I shouldn't be happy, and I shouldn't find joy in the things that I love, and that I should be scared to share that love because I didn't meet the standards of what bigoted, ignorant people wanted from me. And the worst part is, even with all the people claiming cringe culture is dead, it's not. The phrase itself is not a declaration of fact, but an act of rebellion, as it's associated with loving what you love unabashedly without care for the social repercussions. But in that form, it still has to acknowledge that there are social repercussions. Cringe culture may have retired its name, but it's still here under the name it's always had. Ableism isn't dead. It should be, and I hope one day that it is, but it isn't. And even then, it would live on in those moments where everyone it has attacked holds the memory of that ridicule in their minds and forever hides their genuine and beautiful joy from the world. Cringe culture isn't dead, but I hope we all outlive it, and I hope one day I can actually confidently say that Five Nights at Freddy's is still good, without having to stop myself.